Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Phillies Extra. I'm Scott Lauber, and I write about the Phillies and Major League Baseball and host this show each and every week for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And no matter how you found us at Inquirer.com, the Inquirer's YouTube channel, Facebook, X, or by listening to our podcast on Apple or Spotify, I want to thank you so much for spending some of your time with us. My guest this week is Phillies first-year general manager Preston Mattingly. Technically, Preston qualifies as our first repeat guest. He joined us back in June with his dad, the former Yankees icon Don Mattingly, for our Father's Day episode, which happens to be one of my personal favorite shows. If you missed it, please go back and check out that conversation. It was really a lot of fun. But I wanted to have Preston back solo this time because it's September, the stretch run is upon us, and there's so much going on with the Phillies as they try to lock up a playoff spot, repeat as NL East champs, and maybe even secure one of the two best records in the National League and the wild card round bye that would come with that. And the front office, led by President of Baseball Operations Dave Dombrowski and Mattingly, has been busy over the last few days to improve their chances of checking each of those boxes. Now, until a few years ago, teams were allowed to make trades in August for players who cleared waivers. That's how the Phillies acquired Jamie Moyer and Jeff Conine back in 2006, and Scott Air and Matt Stairs in 2008. But waiver trades are kind of like the dinosaurs of baseball transactions. They're a relic of the past, and the July 31st trade deadline is generally considered the last chance for teams to make outside additions to their rosters. But a couple of opportunities arose unexpectedly last weekend, and the Phillies were aggressive. In case you missed it last Sunday, the Phillies claimed lefty reliever Tim Mayza off waivers after he was released by the Pirates. Then they agreed to terms on a minor league contract with veteran starter Walker Buehler, who got released last Friday by the Red Sox. Mayza joined the Phillies right away, taking one of the two additional roster spots that all teams get every September. And he could wind up being a really sneaky important piece of the bullpen puzzle. Because with Zach Wheeler lost for the season, it's no longer a foregone conclusion that the Phillies will move one of their starters to the bullpen. They're now going to need Jesus Luzardo, for example, to start a game, either in the NLCS or maybe even in the division series. And with Jose Alvarado ineligible to pitch in the postseason under terms of his 80-game drug suspension from earlier in the season, it's easy to envision Mayza as the third lefty behind Matt Strahm and Tanner Banks. Mayza is 33 years old. He went to Upper Perkiomen High School, and he pitched in college for Millersville. And he has made 6 career postseason appearances, including 3 scoreless outings for the Yankees last year when they got to the World Series. He's always been tough on left-handed hitters, so if there's a situation in the middle of a playoff game with a few lefties at the plate, let's say it's the 6th inning against the Dodgers, and Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman are due to bat, Mayza could give Rob Thompson another choice rather than having to go to Strahm or even Banks earlier than he wants to. Now, the plan for Buehler isn't as straightforward. The Phillies assigned him to AAA Lehigh Valley, where he will start and where he will stay until they call him up for at least one start as part of a 6-man rotation. Right now, that start is scheduled for Friday, September 12th at home against the Royals. Beyond that, the Phillies say they don't have anything outlined. Buehler is kind of like a lottery ticket. He's a big name with a postseason pedigree that includes standing on the mound at Yankee Stadium and throwing the last pitch of the World Series last year for the Dodgers. But he didn't pitch well for the Red Sox this year after signing a 1-year, $21 million contract in the offseason. In 22 starts, he had a 5.45 ERA and allowed 120 hits and 55 walks in 112 and a third innings. His walk rate rose to 10.8%, well above his 7.2% career mark. He's had Tommy John elbow surgery twice, and you could argue that it's taking him time to get back to his usual form. Well, except that he's been back for 2 years now, and his ERA since returning from the second surgery is 5.42. But the Phillies believe they have some ideas for unlocking something in Buehler that might help him and them down the stretch. Buehler has a notable connection to pitching coach Caleb Cotham in that they both pitched in college at Vanderbilt. I asked Cotham the other day how well he knows Buehler, and he said, quote, I know him decently well just over the years. Haven't been around him a ton from a coach practice standpoint, but a lot of crossover, unquote. And Dombrowski did cite Cotham's ideas for Buehler as one reason the Phillies were interested. So I wanted to invite Mattingly here as a guest to discuss what else went into the decision to take a flyer on Buehler and what it means for top prospect Andrew Painter, who would already be taking a turn in the rotation every fifth day, if not for his struggles this year in AAA. Last winter, Dombrowski made clear that the Phillies thought Painter could make his major league debut by midsummer. July-ish, he famously said. Does Buehler's impending arrival mean that Painter's timeline is now 2026-ish? I also wanted to ask Mattingly about the Phillies' deadline trades for closer Joan Duran and outfielder Harrison Bader, which 5 weeks later couldn't seem to be working out any better, and why he's confident that the Phillies can finally win it all this October after taking one step back in each of the last two postseasons after their unexpected run to Game 6 of the World Series in 2022. And I wanted to get his impressions about being a rookie general manager after running the Phillies farm system for the last 3 years. If you stick with me after the conversation with Mattingly, I'll open up my reporter's notebook and share a few thoughts on Nick Castellanos' playing time, Aaron Nola's struggles, and the Phillies in general as they enter the stretch run. And as always, I'll take a question from a listener at the end. But first, let's get right to it. Here's my sit-down with Phillies GM, Preston Mattingly. Preston Mattingly, welcome to Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this is our 30th show, and you are officially our first two-time guest. I mentioned in our intro that you and your dad were with us before Phillies Blue Jays on Father's Day. You're first as a father, I think, by the way, and that was a really fun conversation. I couldn't be happier to have you back solo this time. And I wanted to invite you on because there's been a lot going on lately, a lot of roster maneuvering as we get into September. But I'd like first to just start with this. As you near the end of, your first regular season as a GM, and feel free to take this in whatever direction you want because it's kind of a broad question. You've been in this front office now for a few years, but what's been your biggest observation or your biggest takeaway from kind of being, the right-hand man now to Dave Dombrowski for all the big decisions in baseball operations as you near the end of year one in this role?
Yeah, probably my biggest takeaway is this. This organization has a lot of really quality people. Being down in Florida, running the PD system, and then finally getting up here, you get exposed to people that you obviously know and you work with. But I think on a daily basis, getting exposed to Ani Kalambi, Dan Aucoin, different people throughout our organization. I can name a lot of people, but those are just two that kind of came to mind. I think it just shows like the quality of the people we have in this organization, and just I'm lucky to be a part of it.
For 3 years before this, like you said, you were running the player development, which means you're in charge of the farm system. And, that's an all-encompassing job. You oversee 4 full season affiliate teams, the rookie ball team in the Florida Complex League. It's about 165 players, right, in the U.S. And then you have the summer league teams in the DR. And I've always heard baseball executives say being a farm director is probably the best apprenticeship for being a GM, that if you can do that job, you can do the job at the big league level. I wonder if you feel that way, like that job prepared you for this.
Yeah, I think like from the PD standpoint, you're obviously dealing with a lot of people management. You mentioned all the players, but that's not mentioning, probably the 100+ staff members as well. I love the, run the PD system. It was an honor to do it. The players we have, the staff we have, it's a great group. And I think it does help you in, as I switched over to now the GM role, trying to get the rhythm of Dave and just what he needs on a daily basis. And other people throughout our front office, you try and be an advocate for different things that people bring to you. And just like I said before, really lucky to be a part of this group. And I think, just continue to grow in this role and, help the team win in any way possible.
The roster is kind of a living, breathing organism, it feels like, right? It's always changing. And even after the trade deadline, like the trade deadline, we tend to think of as really kind of the last opportunity to acquire players from the outside. But I mean, there are other opportunities that arise as well. And I wanted to drill down, if I could, on sort of the 2 moves that you made right as August ended and September began. First, Tim Mayza, and what led you guys to claiming him, because it seems like he could be a sneaky, important pickup for you guys down the stretch? And then Walker Buehler, were you surprised that he became available? And why do you think that your pitching department might be able to help him and have him help you?
Yeah. Acquisition never stops in baseball. I think I'll touch first on Tim. Yeah, I think it was a case where, our scouting group really felt like he was throwing the ball well. We had seen him in multiple different rehab outings. A lot of the data we had on him was kind of like trending back to the way he was in his Blue Jays days. So I think we thought, it was an opportunity to take a guy that's dominated left-handed hitters and to throw into the mix with our guys, a guy that, can come in the early situation like he did, previously in Milwaukee yesterday, and, get at a couple lefties and kind of bridge the gap to Matt Strahm, to Tanner Banks, and in more of the leverage roles, and Jose Alvarado as well. So it's just another quality arm, a guy that's had a ton of success versus left-handed hitters, and we thought it'd be a good add to our mix. And, as every game matters here down the stretch. So just trying to put the best 13 or now 14, in that pitching staff. So, and then in Walker's a different case, but, obviously he got released, and I think just a lot of different conversations between our scouts, a lot of people in our R&I group, and just feeling like, hey, just to protect our starters. I know we wanted to potentially go to 6 starters to give our guys an extra rest. We've leaned heavily on our starting pitching. No surprise. It's a tremendous group we have there, and we wanted to make sure we took care of them down the stretch here. And we thought Walker, even though the overall season numbers may not be what people have expected, we've seen the quality that he still has. He pitched very well against us and a couple of other contenders. So we thought it would be a good guy to add to our group. And Caleb Cotham's had a lot of success with helping pitchers. I mean, just different guys we have on our staff. Obviously we brought over Jesus Luzardo. We feel like Jesus has gotten better, and there's still another gear there for him. And we think there's a few things we can help with Walker too. So we're excited to add him to the mix.
Dave outlined the plan for Buehler, right? He's going to come up. He's going to make a start on September 12th if all goes according to plan, weather and whatnot. And that'll be at home against the Royals. So like you said, you guys will move to the 6-man rotation, which I think you wanted to do last month before you lost Zach. And you'll do that at least for one term, right? And everyone will get an extra day. And you talked about how heavily you've leaned on your starting pitching. Your starting pitching is sort of the strength of the roster, I think. But I wanted to ask you, because it's easy to look at this and say, look, Walker Buehler has had a really good career. He had a lot of success with the Dodgers. He threw the last pitch in the World Series last year. There are a lot of reasons why I would think you'd want to take a look at him. But he had a 5.5 ERA this year in Boston. Why Buehler for that spot, for that 6th spot on the 12th, and not, let's say, Andrew Painter, who has struggled this year in AAA, but, there might be a benefit, I would imagine, to maybe getting his feet wet here late in the season. And, was that much of a conversation piece between, hey, can we use this opportunity to maybe do a few different things, check a few different boxes, get our starters a rest, get Andrew, a start here before the season ends? How much of a conversation was that?
It was definitely a conversation. I think we had multiple internal options, but I think we just thought, adding Buehler, I think we think there's some upside there. And I think, not that there wouldn't be with Andy or any of our internal options as well, but I think, we have to do what's best for the player. And I think just speaking directly to Andy, obviously you mentioned his ERA. I still think, we're really excited with the year he's had. Maybe not from an ERA's perspective. That's not just the only thing we look at. And I think his stuff has continued to trend in a good spot. He's thrown 100+ innings after, missing 2 years with Tommy John. His stuff still grades out really well. Maybe some of the surface performance is not what people want to see, but I think we're really confident in Andy and his ability. So I think at the end of the day, I think we just felt that Walker was a great add to the organization. And I think we don't want to rush players to the big leagues. I think Andy will tell us when he's ready. And, there's obviously some benefits like you mentioned, but I think we just felt like, Walker was a very rare case to add him to our organization, to be playoff eligible and to help us down the stretch.
Yeah. And as you guys have talked about, and I think it's really true with Andy, it's not uncommon for a guy coming back from Tommy John, to maybe deal with some command issues right off the bat. Like we've seen some super accomplished major league pitchers, Sandy Alcantara, the first half of the season, right? Spencer Strider, right? Come back from Tommy John and really kind of struggle to find their way. And Andy is much younger than those guys. He's still kind of learning himself. So, of course, some growing pains were expected. If I could follow quickly on Buehler, he probably had his best start of the season against you guys on July 21st here in Philly. I look back at that game, and he really leaned on his slider. He threw it quite a bit, maybe more than in his other starts. I don't know if that's terribly uncommon. I mean, he throws, 7 pitches, right? So I'm sure that there's some variance in how he uses his stuff. But was there anything in that start where you guys said, man, if we can unlock that guy, there's a really good pitcher left there?
I don't know if it was necessarily just the one start. I think some of the data we have, and we just felt like, Walker, I know you mentioned the slider. We feel like when the Walker Buehler fastball, which is obviously been an elite pitch for him at times, when that ball flight's good with Walker, I think a lot of stuff plays off of it. And I think, he's had some stretches, obviously, throughout his career and the tremendous career he's had. But even this year where that fastball ball flight was right, and then everything kind of follows that, and he's had real success. So I think if we can get, unlock some of that, I think we'll start to see some of the Walker Buehler we've seen in the past.
It's been, a little over a month now, 5 weeks or so since the trade deadline, which is really hard for me to believe. Like, it feels like it was 5 minutes ago. I don't know how you feel about that, having gone through it. But, I wonder now, as you look back at it, how important was it to, address the bullpen after, kind of some of the things that might have happened in the playoffs the last couple of years in the LCS in Arizona and last year against the Mets, to really kind of strengthen that group for the playoffs, and then to do it with a closer who, has elite stuff and experience closing out a postseason series. Because of all the relievers who changed teams, from Mason Miller to Ryan Helsley to all the guys, Bednar, all the guys who were out there who moved, there was really only one guy who kind of combined those two things, the stuff and he stood on a mound to close a series for the Twins a couple of years ago. And you were the team that got Joan Duran. How important was it to get that guy in particular and to shore up the bullpen in general?
Yeah, I don't think we looked at it from a standpoint of, hey, previous, bullpens. I think every team's different every year. And I think, we just felt like it was a group that we could kind of retool a little bit, I will say. Obviously, you've seen some of the additions we made, Mayza, Duran, we've added, David Robertson. So I think it's a group that we kind of flipped over. And we always kind of knew, like, going into the year, hey, this could be a group we would look to add to. And it was evident pretty early on that it was be a group that we wanted to add to. So, yeah, really excited to get Duran. I think, being able to shorten the game for Thompson and his staff, to where you can kind of line stuff up to, different pockets to get guys in different matchups, favorable matchups, and then know you have Duran sitting at the back of the game. It's always valuable for a manager. And I think, honestly, when we went into the deadline, we had a lot of different guys on the board, and Duran was one of the guys at the top. So for us to be able to acquire him, we were really excited about that. And obviously, like you said, a lot of great stuff. He's had a lot of history of, success, and then obviously closing out some playoff games, like you mentioned, was also a benefit.
Your other trade deadline addition, Harrison Bader, I think he's given you defense in center field. He's given you energy. He's gotten a bunch of clutch hits already. And he's kind of, he's quickly become a favorite of Rob Thompson's. He's kind of got a distinctive style on the field and off of it. How much of a lift has he kind of given to you guys offensively, and really just being able to put him out there in center field every day? And generally speaking, how are you feeling about the outfield where, Rob still seems to be trying to find the best three guy combination almost on a game by game basis still at this point?
Yeah, Harrison's been a great add for us. He's a guy that, we scouted throughout the year, and honestly, he's had a tremendous year even with Minnesota as well. And he definitely plays with a swagger and a confidence it's fun to watch. So he's been a welcome add to our group. Yeah, I think overall, I think you look at some of the guys' numbers. Obviously Marshy got off to like a really slow start, but his month over month, this guy's played really well for multiple months in a row. Obviously defensively, he's been elite in the corners, and he's been serviceable in center field. Harrison added another element to our outfield. I think we now look at at the way our mix looks, and any given time you have Martian left or Kepler and Bader in center, you're elite in two positions. And I know Castillo has had a little bit of tough stretch here the last few months, but he's obviously had a history of hitting. He's been still very quality versus left-handed pitching, and he's a guy that we think down the stretch could help us.
One thing we've learned with Nick, right, is that there's usually a really hot streak around the bend. in the back of your mind, is that always there? Like, hey, if we can just keep him going enough, right? Maybe we hit that hot streak at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, Nick's had a tremendous career offensively, and I think we've seen stretches like you mentioned where he struggles for a month and a half, and then you see a month and a half where he kind of carries the club. So we know that's in there. I know our staff's doing everything possible to continue to work with him, and I know Nick is as well. He's a worker. He's always out there early hitting, doing defensive works with Paco, and so I think we know the worker that Nick is, and we know he's going to continue to go up there and look to do damage.
I asked you about Andy Painter a little earlier. I'll ask you about Justin Crawford because I think there have been points during the season where it felt like, okay, maybe this is a time where he could come up and help. I mean, certainly the year he's put together in AAA, every time I look, he's got 2 hits in a game. How much discussion has there been about Justin throughout the course of the year? Maybe not as much lately, especially since you got Bader and he's been playing almost every day in center field, but just like, hey, can we find a time, or was there a period where you're like, well, we're getting closer to a time when maybe Justin could come here and play every day? Because I know playing every day, making sure he got at bats was really the most important thing.
Yeah, Dave and Tom's obviously been very public about this. I think with Justin, he's had a tremendous season. But if Justin would to come up, we want him to be able to play every day. I think it's not beneficial for a young player to come up and just sit. So he's definitely on the radar. There's different conversations throughout the year that happen. Sometimes it's very close to happening. Other times, it feels like it's a little bit farther away. But he's put himself on the radar of everybody, honestly, with the season he's having. And he's continuing to get better. I think people lose sight of he's a 21-year-old kid in AAA. We have him playing some corner outfield as well, just to get him exposure in different spots. So he's hit at different spots in the lineup. He's hit first, he's hit second. So we just want to expose him to a lot of different things where he could see at the major league level, and just continue to work with him. He's not a finished product by any stretch of the matter, and he's still getting better every day. He's still a kid, and he's still growing into his body. So I think there's so much upside with Justin, and we want to, from a development standpoint, we want to continue to tap into that down there in AAA.
Sure. One thing I'm always interested in with you is you worked with AJ Preller in San Diego. Now you're working with Dave. They're about a generation apart in age, right? But I think most of your peers in the industry would probably agree that they might be 2 of the most fearless presidents of baseball ops in terms of trading a prospect or 2 when they think that they can win right now, and just in general, not being afraid to kind of run headfirst into making a deal and not worrying about a year from now, does this look like a bad trade? Not having that fear of that. And I also look at Dave, I covered a couple of his teams in Boston for a few years. And, I think of all the young players and prospects that he didn't trade, right? He got there and he didn't trade Mookie Betts. And later down the line, he didn't trade Rafi Devers or Andrew Benintendi and Eduardo Rodriguez. And they won a World Series with those guys. How would you compare, AJ and Dave's philosophies in terms of team building? And, is there a lesson you've learned from Dave, maybe also from AJ, about just having the conviction to do some big, bold things when the time calls for it?
Yeah, they're honestly pretty similar. Obviously different ages, but I think they both love baseball, number one, tireless workers. And I think they want to do everything possible to win. And that means trading prospects. And that's what they're going to do to help the major league club. Because at the end of the day, it's about winning. And obviously AJ's done a tremendous job of building that, San Diego club out there the last, 5-6 years. They've been in the playoffs. I think this would be 4 out of 6. And then Dave as well has had a history of winning. So I think they're very similar from a standpoint of, I think they've got a lot of star players on their teams. And from AJ's standpoint, one thing I've taken away from him is just the tireless work ethic. And he taught me so much on the scouting side about players and, kind of no stone unturned, always finding players. You have to have players to win and doing anything possible to sign them, to acquire them. I learned a lot from him about that, and Dave as well. Honestly, it's 2 tremendous front office, heads of baseball operations. I'm very fortunate to learn from both of them. And So very similar in the way they run their teams, and obviously put the quality of players they do on the field.
One of the things that has always struck me about Dave, like I said, was kind of like the self-scouting, kind of scouting your own guys. And a lot of the guys that he has traded, and we look, Ruben was good at this too. When Ruben Amaro was running this, like he traded a ton of prospects in like 08, 09, 10. And, it was amazing how few of them came to the big leagues and were impact players. And so they obviously did a really good job of self-scouting and knowing who to hold on to and who not to. Is that in some ways kind of the toughest part of the job? Because I would imagine when they're your guys, you might see them a little bit differently, and maybe to try to see players who are in your own system with a little bit more of a sort of objective eye.
Yeah, I think people lose sight of how hard the major leagues is, and how big of a gap there is between the minor leagues and the major leagues. And so I think, look, it's really tough to be an everyday major league player or a rotation starter. As you've seen guys throughout the years come up that were hyped to be the next thing. It's a really tough game. There's a lot of really good players, and I think it is very important to know your own guys. I think you have to scout your organization better than everyone else, and you mentioned you have to be honest. That's, I think, a lot of faults sometimes in organizations is you fall in love with your own players, and you don't scout them with the same way that you scout players in other organizations, and you aren't as tough on them as you would be within your own guys. So I think you have to know your guys better than everyone else.
All right, let me get you out of here on this. And I didn't, this kind of just came to me. So talking to you today, your old minor league roommate, Clayton Kershaw, went 5-0, I think, with a 1.80 ERA or 1.9 ERA in August. I was at the All-Star game, and I thought that was one of the cooler moments with him being mic'd up and then the ovation that he got. He's still getting it done at age 37. Have you talked to him at all lately? Number one. And two, are you kind of emotionally prepared for the possibility that you guys might face him in a playoff game in October and what that might be like for you? Because I'm sure you guys are still close and you knew each other way back when.
Yeah, honestly, anything Clayton does doesn't surprise me. Obviously, the competitor that he is, the work ethic, he's going to just he's going to find a way to keep getting people out. We'll text here and there throughout the season. I try not to bug him. Obviously, I know how busy he is and how hard he works at his craft, so I try not to bug him throughout the year. And look, if we would have to match up in the playoffs, that may be the one time I'm not pulling for him. So, it'd be exciting to sit up in the suite and watch him, and hopefully the Phillies come out on top.
Yeah, he was saying at the All-Star game, because he was the commissioner's pick and whatever, and he was like, well, this might be the last one. I don't know if I even merit being here. And I think he shortchanged himself, because the August he had, where would the Dodgers be, right, without him and what he's doing for them. So that would be a lot of fun to see, and I'm sure you guys would have a lot of fun with that as well. So, Preston, this was great. Like I said, a major league roster is ever changing, and if the last few weeks are any indication, this is still a super busy time for you guys in terms of getting everything in shape for the stretch run. So I couldn't be happier or more thankful that you were able to carve out a few minutes to spend with us here at Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
You bet. Of course, I want to thank Preston Mattingly again for joining me this week. It's time to open the reporter's notebook, and I want to talk about two core players whose roles are up in the air as the Phillies head down the stretch and gear up for the postseason. Nick Castellanos and Aaron Nola. All right, so remember back to June 16th in Miami? Rob Thompson subbed out Castellanos for defense in right field in the ninth inning, and Castellanos reacted by making what Thompson described as an inappropriate comment in the dugout that, quote, crossed the line, unquote. Castellanos got benched the next day, thereby ending his streak of 231 consecutive games played. Case closed, right? Well, apparently not, because for the first time since June 16th, Thompson took Castellanos out for defense again on August 29th at Citizens Bank Park. The Phillies were leading by one run going into the ninth inning. Castellanos' spot in the order had just passed. And by the way, Castellanos is the worst outfield defender in baseball, according to most available metrics. It was a no-brainer, something Thompson should have been doing more often and must do whenever he can in the playoffs. Yet Castellanos complained when he was asked about it after the game. I don't want to waste a lot of time on this because I'm not sure anyone on the face of the earth other than Castellanos doesn't see the sense in what Thompson did. Look, it's understandable for a player to not want to come out of a game. Pat Burrell didn't love it when Charlie Manuel would replace him late in games back in 2007 and 08. But he didn't moan and groan about it publicly because deep down he knew it made sense for the team. But I do want to discuss Castellanos' overall reduction in playing time and ask a hypothetical question. If the Phillies are facing a righty, let's say Yoshinobu Yamamoto of the Dodgers, or Freddie Peralta of the Brewers, or any of the Padres starters, Michael King, Nick Pivetta, Dylan Cease, or even Mets rookie Nolan McLean in Game 1 of a playoff series, will Castellanos be in the Phillies lineup? Should he be? We'll come back to that. First, let me say this. I've been comparing Thompson to kind of like a plate spinner in the circus because he's tried to keep 5 outfielders going at the same time while knowing that he can only write 3 of their names in the lineup for each game. But as August turned to September, it's starting to feel like it's becoming more of a meritocracy, with Thompson rewarding good at-bats and production with more playing time. That's meant a lot more Harrison Bader in center field against both lefties and righties, and a little bit less of Castellanos in right against some righties in favor of lefty-hitting Max Kepler. And look, it's a big change, because for 3.5 years, it was almost a reflex for Thompson to write Castellanos' name on the lineup card. Then on August 9th in Texas, he sat him against Jacob deGrom, as tough a righty as there is in the sport. And since then, Castellanos has been on the bench for roughly 1 game per series. Castellanos said recently that it's been, quote, a big adjustment, unquote. And I'm sure it has, because over the last 10 full seasons, he averaged 146 starts. Last year, he became the first Phillies player to start all 162 games since Jimmy Rollins in his MVP 2007 season. Since 2014, Castellanos has played more games than any outfielder in all of baseball. And he's been part of this Phillies veteran core with Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, JT Realmuto, and eventually Trey Turner for the last several years. But look, this is Major League Baseball, where respect should not supersede production. And Castellanos is having one of the least productive stretches of his career at the plate. In August, he batted 180 with 2 doubles, 2 homers, 3 RBIs, and a 590 OPS. It was his fewest RBIs in a month in which he has been healthy since he became a full-time player in 2014 with the Tigers. Even last season, when he got off to that terribly slow start, he drove in 9 runs in April. He's been an RBI machine over the last decade plus, and it just hasn't happened for him for most of the season. Castellanos has also been a streaky hitter, though. And as you heard Preston Mattingly say in our conversation, when Castellanos is cold, it usually means there's a super hot stretch right around the bend. Everybody remembers 2023. In a 50-game stretch after the All-Star break, Castellanos batted .214 with a .622 OPS. Thompson dropped him to 7th in the order, even batting him 8th for a couple of games. And Castellanos batted .296 with a .1016 OPS over the last 20 games of the regular season, then went 9 for 23 with 4 homers in 6 games through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. If you hang with Castellanos long enough, it usually pays off. But Castellanos is running out of runway now, and to me, one of the biggest questions in the final 3 weeks of the season is whether he can catch that wave and get back to being an everyday player. If he doesn't, Thompson will have a decision when the playoffs roll around. It's one thing to take Castellanos out for defense in the 9th inning. It's quite another to leave him out of the lineup entirely. But maybe that ends up being the right move for the Phillies. And if it is, how will Castellanos react? Definitely something to keep an eye on. Let's move quickly to Aaron Nola, who had another rough start the other night in Milwaukee, allowing 6 runs in 5 innings in a loss to the Brewers. Nola has an 8.38 ERA in 4 starts since he returned from 3 months on the injured list and a 6.78 ERA in 13 starts overall this year. That would be the 9th worst ERA in Phillies history among pitchers who made at least 13 starts in a season. You've heard of a few guys on that list. Taijuan Walker, of course, finished with a 7.10 ERA last year. Roy Halladay in 2013 had a 6.82 ERA. But generally speaking, that is not company that you want to keep. There are a few common threads in Nola's season. He struggled out of the stretch. Opponents are hitting .303 with an .875 OPS with runners on base. He also has had trouble commanding his fastball. And as everyone knows, Nola doesn't overwhelm anyone with velocity. He never has. He's a command and control pitcher. And when he isn't locating the way he needs to, he tends to get hit. There's been a theme in Nola's last two starts in particular. The first inning has been a problem. Against the Brewers, the first 5 batters reached base and came around to score on a walk, hit batter, single to load the bases, 2-run single, and 3-run homer. In the start before that, at home against the Braves, the first 6 batters went single, walk, foul pop, single to load the bases, walk, 2-run single. Quote, I just kind of felt off, especially in the first, Nola told reporters in Milwaukee, including my colleague Lachlan March. I've just got to make pitches, and I think the first inning has kind of been biting me in the butt the last couple times. Okay, so short term, Nola undoubtedly will get with pitching coach Caleb Cotham to determine if they need to make an adjustment to how they're preparing for starts. Longer term, though, the Phillies are going to need to figure out if they can trust Nola in the playoff rotation. Now, if they finish with one of the 2 best records in the National League and get a bye in the wild card round, they'll need only 3 starters in the division series. In that case, it's possible they could go with their 3 lefties, Christopher Sanchez, Ranger Suarez, and Jesus Luzardo, and not use Nola until the NLCS, if they get there. But if they're the number 3 seed, or if they somehow don't win the NL East and make the playoffs as a wild card, they would need a 4th starter as soon as the divisional round. The Phillies would certainly prefer to have Nola start game 2 or 3 in any series because, number 1, he has extensive postseason experience, and number 2, he would split up their 3 lefties. But what if Nola doesn't get it together this month? Taijuan Walker hasn't pitched as well in his last 2 or 3 starts. The Phillies will see what Walker Buehler can give them, but based on how he pitched in Boston, they can't exactly count on him to make postseason starts. And Andrew Painter got knocked around again this week in AAA and has an ERA that's like 5.5. Thompson said he has, quote, full confidence, unquote, in Nola, and cited 2023 when Nola had a really rough September and bounced back with a 0.96 ERA in his first 3 postseason starts against the Marlins, Braves, and Diamondbacks. Is it wishful thinking that Nola can rebound similarly this year? Maybe. But without Zach Wheeler atop the rotation, the Phillies are almost certainly going to need Nola to pitch to his capabilities if they have any chance of playing deep in October. Okay, it's time for our last segment. We call this Hit and Run, where we take a question from you out there in our Phillies Extra community. There are several ways you can join the conversation. Drop me an email at slauber@inquirer.com. Reach out to me on the social media platform of your choice, X, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, you name it. Or drop a question in the comments section on YouTube as well. As I suspected, a lot of folks have Nola on their mind, especially after that start in Milwaukee. I always like to look at the big picture, though, so I'm going to take this one from Ryan R. Holston at Ryan_Holston on X, who asks, what is going on with Nola? Is it time to panic about having signed a 31-year-old pitcher to a 7-year, $172 million extension? Ryan, thanks for the question. It's a really good one because while everyone wonders, and understandably so, how Nola fits into the postseason rotation for the 2025 Phillies, it is important to remember that he signed through 2030, so they have him for 5 more seasons after this one. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and crush Dave Dombrowski for signing Nola because at the time, back in the fall of 2023, I thought it was something the Phillies needed to do. They had just come off the NLCS loss to the Diamondbacks. Christopher Sanchez had a promising second half of the season, but he wasn't Christopher Sanchez yet. So nobody knew that the Phillies had a potential number 2 starter right under their noses. The alternatives to Nola in the 2023-24 free agent class were Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, Eduardo Rodriguez, and then guys like Sonny Gray and Seth Lugo, who were a little older. The Phillies made a huge offer that winter to Yoshinobu Yamamoto, but like everyone else in baseball, they were aware that he preferred the Dodgers. So they knew Nola. They love Nola. He wanted to stay here. It made sense on a lot of levels. And whatever you might think of Nola, he has been among the best 8 to 10 starters in Phillies history. He just has. And that's one of the reasons why it's been so difficult to watch him this year. But to answer your question, Ryan, I don't think the Phillies are panicking, not yet, or having any buyer's remorse. This is the first season since 2017 that Nola missed any time with an injury, and it wasn't an arm injury. It was an ankle issue and a fractured rib. So if he doesn't turn things around this month, I think Nola gets a mulligan, at least within the organization, and everyone hopes and expects that he'll bounce back next year. But I do think there needs to be a serious conversation about whether Nola needs to reinvent himself a little bit as he enters the back nine, so to speak, of his career. And I say that because of all the things I mentioned earlier. He's never been a big velocity guy. It's all about the sinker and the curveball and command and control and hitting his spots and pitching to contact and keeping hitters off balance. Nola doesn't have as much margin for error as like Zach Wheeler, for example, who was still throwing 96, 97 before he got injured. So maybe Nola needs to change his patterns or come up with new ways to get hitters out. The Phillies have a lot of confidence in Caleb Cotham and the rest of their pitching department, and I think one of the biggest challenges moving forward will be to figure out how Nola can be effective over the next few seasons so that they don't end up regretting that contract extension or lamenting that they paid Nola based more on past performance than his ability to maintain it. Okay, we'll leave it there this week and tell you that every episode of Phillies Extra is available by going to Inquirer.com and clicking on the Inquirer Live tab or on the Inquirer's YouTube and Facebook pages. That's always an easy way to catch up on any show that you have missed. You can also listen to this episode and most others on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And while you're there, please give us a follow, rate and review us. We want to hear from you. Thanks again to my guest, Phillies General Manager Preston Mattingly. And thanks, as always, to our producer, Angelica Irizarry, for making sure this is a well-oiled machine each and every week. It's only going to get more hectic from here on out for the next few weeks and into October, and for as long as the Phillies keep playing, and there's no way that we could do this show without her. But most of all, thanks so much to you out there for listening, watching, and of course for reading the Philadelphia Inquirer. We'll talk to you next week.